Welcome to the Fort Nelson Chamber of Commerce All Candidates meeting. My name is Gary Foster. I'm the president of the Fort Nelson Chamber of Commerce, and I will act as your moderator this evening. I would like to thank the candidates for their participation. With us, we have Dan Davies, our current MLA and independent, and we have Jordan Keeley, BC Conservative Party. Ian McMahon was not able to attend today. He was representing the NDP party. We'd like to thank the Northern Rockies Regional Municipality, BC Northern Real Estate Board, Save On Foods, and IGA for helping to sponsor this event. We will be streaming the All Candidates meeting on Facebook Live on the Chamber of Commerce election page. However, only candidates will appear on the screen. There are a few rules to go through before we begin. First, please turn off your cell phones or put them on vibrate. If you must take a phone call, please go to the lobby to take it there. The order of speaking was determined by draw, and closing statements will be made in the reverse order. Each candidate will be allotted 3 minutes to make opening statements, and candidates are asked not to interrupt other candidates' opening or closing statements. Questions to the candidate may be asked at the microphones or in written format. Submission forms or written questions are available by raising your hand, and one of our volunteers will bring you a form. The moderator will have the responsibility of ensuring that the written questions are directed to the appropriate candidate. If necessary, questions will be directed by the moderator to other candidates to ensure balance. I will rule out of order any questions deemed inappropriate, offensive, derogatory, or that would seem to attack the integrity of the candidate or bring the Chamber of Commerce reputation into disrepute. Please approach the microphone with questions only, and I will rule out of order any person who attempts to use the meeting as a platform for expressing a point of view on any issue. Questions from the floor will be taken from approximately 7:25 this evening till 8:40, and they will be limited to one individual to ensure as wide a participation from the audience as possible. If you have another question, please step away from the microphone. Allow others to speak first, and if time allows, you may return to the microphone. Candidates will limit their questions or their answers to questions 2 minutes to ensure as wide a discussion as possible, and candidates will be allowed 3 minutes for closing statements. I will now ask Jordan Keeley to come up and make his 3 minutes opening presentation. Jordan?
Thank you very much for having me. I always enjoy coming up to Fort Nelson. It's a beautiful drive. It's different than when I used to come here with my service truck and working as a millwright going back 15 years ago. And we see the difference between now and then. I'm a farmer and a mechanic. I never thought that I'd get into politics. I put my name into local government 2 years ago, and I'm the Area B Director, which covers about half the portion of the MLA region. I got into politics because I'm personally involved, and I can't help but not sit off to the side. I have to try and fix when I see something that's broken. And right now, our system is broken. So I started off by getting into local politics, and when I got into that, I found that about 60% of the constituents had provincial issues. And they had a very difficult time trying to get any help. So when I had the opportunity last November to put my name in for the Conservative Party of BC, I looked at where I could try and make the biggest difference. And when it comes to the issues that we're facing, to highlight the drugs, crime, healthcare, affordability, these are all major things, and it has to get fixed. This election is so important. I can't imagine if it doesn't change what the next 4 years would look like. And I would love to be able to make a big difference, especially the main reason that I got into it was with healthcare. That I lost my father a couple years ago, and it was a scenario that that wasn't nice to go through, and some of the issues of why it happened were political, and that was one of the reasons why I had to step aside from my current life as a farmer and a mechanic, and try and see if I can fight to make a difference. So here I am today. It's been quite the journey so far. We've held over 20 town halls and events, and it's amazing to meet supporters and then also hear a lot of the concerns. I'll wrap up by saying that I think our party is gaining major momentum, and I look forward to being able to form a majority government. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. I'll now call on our MLA, Dan Dave.
Thanks very much, Gary. Thank you as well to the Chamber for hosting this evening, as well as thanks to everyone here tonight that took the time out of their evening to come and listen to the candidates, as well as all the folks that are online. I understand there's quite a few people online. As a lifelong resident of this region, born and raised here, it has been my absolute privilege to represent you here in Northern Rockies for the last 7 years. I'm going to be talking a lot, obviously, over the next 90 minutes about the individual issues as they come up, the healthcare, obviously, the economy, crime and disorder, which is a huge issue that you have been faced. But I'm going to talk a little bit, or going to use this opportunity to talk about a couple of things. And one of them is what happened and why am I running as an independent? The stories that are out there is, am I a conservative, and what can an independent do for you? So it's no secret what happened to the BC United just a few short weeks ago. I was basically kicked to the curb by the party. And my whole line behind this when this when this incident came up, was thinking, this is another decision that was made in Vancouver for us. And I'll be damned if someone in Vancouver in a boardroom is going to be making decisions for what the rest of my career looks like, as well as what is going to be happening in the Northeast. You see, I've always intended on running in this election over the last 4 years. And I've always intended on running this election because we have a lot more work to do. I love this community. I come up here regularly. It is why I opened up a constituency office in Fort Nelson, because I know there's some big issues up here that need to be dealt with. And it is my commitment to each and every one of you to make sure that I'm committed to Fort Nelson until we see those things brought forward and solved. Now again, first question that I hear often is, am I splitting the vote? And I'm going to put some of these rumors to rest. Absolutely not. There is no vote split here in Peace River North and the Northern Rockies. This is a race on the right, and I've been saying that quite a bit over the last number of weeks. A split, you would need to have 40%, the NDP would need to have 40% in this riding. Traditionally, the NDP only get in the area of about 10%. So there is no split that's going to be happening. And at a time like we are in right now, the most important thing, and what I believe this election about, is who has the most experience moving forward to solve the issues and work on the issues that are concerning to you. Am I conservative? Well, anybody that knows me knows the answer is yes. Just like my predecessors, Dick Neufeld and Pat Pym, who are both very strong. Finally, what can an independent do? So much. Standing orders have changed, modernizing the economy, modernizing the legislature, giving full rights to each of the MLAs that are in that building tonight. So I look forward to more discussions here over the next 90 minutes, and we will see you on the floor. I don't want to take your stuff. I'm taking your agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Now we will take some questions from the floor. Do we have anybody who wants to approach the microphone? Or maybe I'll start with one I have already here. Just give us maybe a short 1 or 2 minutes on this. How would you reduce the cost of doing business in the province? Dan?
Yeah, well, obviously, we've seen a lot of increased taxes that we've seen. The provincial government over the last 7 years has increased by 140,000 public sector employees. Now, as you know, when you get a lot of public sector employees into, doesn't matter what the ministry is, that's just creating layers of red tape that is being put onto, the backs of people trying to do business. We got to get back to an environment in this region, an environment in British Columbia, that is open to business, that is attracted for investors to come into, whether it be Northern Rockies or throughout BC. Because what we're seeing right now is people being pushed into Alberta and other jurisdictions where it's easier to do business. So as we start seeing, that happening, resources leaving, revenue for the province leaving, the only place that the government can reach is into your pocket. And we've seen that. We're running a $5 billion deficit this year. Or actually, it's closer to $9 billion this year. We've had 4 years of multi-billion-dollar deficits, and there was no end in sight with this government. So we need to be promoting our resource sector, getting it going again, especially here with all the opportunities up in the Horn, as well as the Liard in our natural gas. Get people working, get the economy going, get those revenues back into the province so that they can start not taking the money out of your pocket. And I think that is a huge piece. If we can get our resource sector, get the economy back up and running by focusing on that, I think the affordability issue will improve greatly.
Jordan, I'll read the question again. How would you reduce the cost of doing business in the province?
So I won't bother standing because I'll be too far away from the mic.
Sure.
I think the first place where we can start is when it comes to variables when we look at affordability, whether or not it's the province or the citizens within the province. You look at the carbon tax and other taxes, and it just seems like we keep on getting taxed into poverty. And the Conservative Party of BC is committed to try and alleviate that, especially when it comes to the carbon tax. When you look at it, it's not just a tax, it's an inflationary tool. And right now, you can go and buy a product, like on my farm, a tube of grease, depending on how many times it's transported. You can pay carbon tax on that several times over. So when you look at how tools like that are being used to tax us, we only have so much money. And we need to go back to the era of when I first came up here, when I was running my service truck, and this area was booming. We had forestry, we had oil and gas. There was polar board when I was up here last as well. We need to support our resource industry because that's one of the biggest revenue sources that we can use. We also need to look at cutting red tape when it comes to within the government. That it's increased in size, 38% with the current government of the NDP. We need to look at trimming that red tape and alleviating that pressure on our government and the record debt that we have provincially and then even federal, that we cannot take the burden anymore of the load of them taxing us and taxing us and taxing us. We need to focus on our small business sector, that they're the lifeblood of all of our communities. It's just like how most of our communities were formed around our forestry industry and the infrastructure that it brings and the great paying jobs that it offers. Right now we see an attack on that industry, and it's Fort Nelson and Fort St. John is just currently experiencing a possible closure at the end of the year, unless it actually does get bought out, which I'm hoping for. Right now, that mill employs so many, and we need to focus. Sorry, I haven't seen that timer change at all. Sorry.
We're getting pretty close to time.
Oh yeah, we're getting close at it. We need to look at bringing back our revenue sector in a sustainable manner. and be able to do it environmentally.
Thank you. If you've got questions and you prefer just to write them down, Bev has got a board here that you can write your questions down on. Or if you'd like to approach the microphone, you can do that. Mayor Fraser.
Thank you very much. This is, pardon me, there we go. There, I think that's better. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming to our community. I'm going to ask a question that was asked 7 years ago when I sat there next to you, Dan. The question was posed by a very bright woman in this community who's no longer with us. The question was, what does Fort Nelson mean to you? And what will keep it in the forefront of your mind if you're elected and you're in Victoria? Why do we matter?
Thank you. Jordan, I'll get you to answer this question first, and then Dan. Reverse order of the last question.
Sure. Fort Nelson is important to me, just like every other community in the Peace region. That it's every single one of those sectors have different resources, different opportunities that they can offer people that would like to be able to move to this region. That Fort Nelson, I want to see it so then it can be that hub again, going up the Alaska Highway, to be able to see the opportunities of a possible polar board or a sawmill or other secondary processes that can be harvested. Those are all valuable things that can offer this town an amazing opportunity for people to thrive here. And I want to be able to try and fight to make that happen in all of our communities. And it's not just going to be in one community like Fort Nelson. I am going to fight for every single community in this region.
Dan.
Yeah, thanks, and a great question, Rob. You know, I would say probably the biggest thing that makes me come here and come up here often is all of you. It's the people of this community, the people of Northern Rockies, you know, right up into the north. When I was first running, well, even before when I was running, I started the cadet program here in Fort Nelson quite a few years ago. And, you know, I would come up after work and come up here, and, you know, we had a lot of youth in Fort Nelson. Young families that were working, families that were, you know, gainfully employed. And, you know, we've seen that obviously switch. We've seen a number of these organizations, or not-for-profits, or youth groups that have left the community. It comes back to the people. It comes back to Fort Nelson is, you know, a significant part of the northeastern part of British Columbia. It's what makes us who we are in this region. And as I've said numerous times, you know, when we're all together, we're much stronger. Whether that's, you know, Fort St. John and Fort Nelson, up through, you know, Toad River, our communities down south, Hudson's Hope, we all need to be strong. And, you know, that was, you know, one of the great things that I remember when I was on city council, you know, being part of the, you know, the North Central Local Government Association, where everyone was together, and we were all down in Vancouver or in Victoria, singing off the same sheet and talking about how great the North is, and, you know, how we have a get her done kind of an attitude. But that only works when we're all doing well. And that has been my commitment to Fort Nelson, is to not stop until we have, you know, a vibrant community here in the north. And I've been, you know, tirelessly working and trying to get us to that point, and I will continue to do so.
Thank you, Dan. Next question. I'll give this to you as well, Dan, to start with. How will you get BC Rail updated and running?
Yeah, I've been talking about BC Rail now CN Rail, formerly BC Rail, for a number of years now. I really do believe that the economic viability of this community, you know, speaking of getting it back to being a vibrant community, is much dependent on that rail line being upgraded. Whether we're talking about opening up mining opportunities in the far northeast, whether we're talking about the natural gas out of the Horn and the Liard, whether we're talking about a forest industry here. And I mean a forest industry that is here, not shipping logs out, but actually, milling logs or looking at opportunities, other opportunities to do value added here. So the rail line is absolutely critical, and it is bringing together industry, bringing together the province, the federal government, CN Rail, to talk about what that rail line means to this community and how we can all work together to get it back up to where it needs to be. And there's a lot of money that is going to be needed to that. I understand that the federal government has shown some interest. We need to get the province on board. We need to get CN Rail on board, and that is something that I've been working on. I've met with CN Rail. We've had lots of conversations, but lots more work to do.
Thank you. Jordan, let me just read the question again.
Sure.
How will you get BC Rail updated and running?
I think that when we see how things are going right now with the current campaign, that when people get out to vote, that there's a good chance that the Conservative Party of BC can form a majority government. When we do, it'll put us in a scenario where we can look at the Crown corporations and how they can be improved with certain ones. We can do audits on them. And I hear it talked about when it comes to experience, and John Rustad, he has a lot of experience, and he could be the next premier. And what's amazing about that is that he could be the first premier from the north. We haven't seen that before. The mentality difference between the premiers that we see the cities and what we see in the rural areas, it gives us a chance to have a leader that actually understands the rural area of the province, and not just the Lower Mainland. It's 99% of the province is pretty much rural, and I think there's a major disconnect there. So when you look at major infrastructure projects, these are things that my party wants to invest in. And when you look at approximately $54 million to be able to upgrade the rail line, I think it's vital to get the resources up here thriving again, and that it could be very lucrative, especially depending on some of the corporations or businesses that come up here. They can look at the options of how they might try and utilize that rail line. And I think that when you look at the multiple opportunities of how that could be pursued, it just emphasizes the fact that we need to focus on the infrastructure projects to help utilize our resource industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. Kathy, you have a question? I'll get Jordan to answer this first, and then Dan.
Good day. Kathy Dickey, member of the Fort Downs First Nation. I got to stand up here. I'm too short. I'm too short. Or this is too tall, I should say. So I'm going to make. So when we lost our forest industry, when we lost our natural gas industry, when the blueberry case, also under Norman Yahe, they happened under the rightish wing of government. And the Yahe case happened because John Rustad was the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs, and in terms of how he treated the people from Blueberry. They took him to court, and that's what happened. So my questions might sound a little bit strange after making that comment, but when I used to sit at the council table out on the res, industry wanted certainty. All they wanted to know was certainty. Well, just tell us the rules and we'll follow the rules. That's all they want. So how do you think industry needs certainty?
Thank you very much for the question. So I think to attract industry, we do have to show certainty that it's beneficial for them to actually feel safe to do business in our province. And I think when you talk about John Rustad, that he's dealt with First Nations quite extensively, and I think he can pursue a role where we can look at a balance that works very well overall in the province. But right now, when you look at SOGI of how it was when you look at DRIPA and how it was introduced to our province, the framework of UNDRIP, when it was brought in, it wasn't really designed for our country. It wasn't designed for our province. And where John Rustad would like to go is finding something that's designed for our region and for our province. And with that, we can communicate in a beneficial manner, that we can do it sustainably. We can do it in a way that we're still looking at the environment, and being able to pursue the revenue of having industry here, having jobs that provide a great way of life. I think that communication can be open, but right now, when you look at the left-wing government that we currently have, and inside the legislature, it keeps on shifting more and more socialist, and as it does that, financially, we're starting to get into a dire strait, and we need to bring ourselves into a fiscal compliance so then we're actually safe to invest again and have a good credit rating.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Kathy. And I think in the discussions that I've had, even just recently, with folks in Petronas, folks in CNRL, there was one of the things that they were quite nervous was when they did hear that potentially the potential new BC Conservative government would rip up DRIPA. And I think that does send some shockwaves down in regards to the certainty. Now, we know that there has been obviously huge issues in regards to how things are being implemented, but I don't think that falls on DRIPA, that falls on the NDP government who haven't implemented it well. The DRIPA is a framework that really doesn't, it brings forward what's already in the Canadian Constitution. I think it's Section 35, I believe, where the Indigenous rights are already enshrined in the Constitution. We need to be making sure that we are providing that certainty for our industry. And when you tear up an agreement that's been in place now for quite a number of years, that is not giving certainty to industry. It is not giving certainty whether you're oil and gas, whether you're forestry, or whether you're mining. It is, it's not as easy as, a couple of words. It's going to take work. It's going to take partnerships and making sure that all the key players are at the table and moving forward in a way that is going to benefit all communities, First Nation communities, our towns like Fort Nelson. So it is absolutely something I think that we need to work on, but I don't believe tearing up the agreement is the way forward.
Thank you. I'm just looking for a question here on healthcare. I think we've done some resource questions here. What investments would you make to encourage and support additional investment in our community? Dan?
Well, I mean, we've talked about the rail line already. I think that is a huge investment that needs to happen. Providing those, improving transportation corridors, improvements on the highway to make sure that, we do continue to be able to move goods and services north and south. I think opportunities, and Fort Nelson provides a ton of great opportunities for people that enjoy the outdoors, for people that want a small town. And I think embracing that to attract younger professionals, we need to make sure that our healthcare is up and running, that we're not having ER closures like we have right now. When people want to look at a community to move, whether it's seniors or young families that are looking for opportunities, they want to know that their hospital is going to be open. They want to know that there are good schools here and opportunities for that. They want to know that there's childcare available. So I think we need to make sure that we are bolstering those basic, fundamental pieces that make a community, that make Fort Nelson a great community to live in. And then go back to, encouraging an environment where industry will invest. And that's obviously going to take a lot of work working with government. to get up there and actually recognize the importance of BC's resource sector, recognizing the importance of the resource sector, very specifically here in the Northeast, again, forestry and natural gas, mining, and we can work on all of those pieces. We certainly can have an economy and, you know, a vibrant community here in Fort Nelson.
Thank you. Jordan, what investments would you make to encourage and support additional investments in our community?
So I think right now when we look at the communities, right now it is vital in our healthcare system that we need to invest. When it comes to training our healthcare workers, we need to focus on actually being able to do it local and have it so then they actually stay local, that they don't actually leave. We need nurses when it comes to here. Most of the time the reason for the ER closure is nursing shortage. We need to promote, train, and retain our healthcare workers. We need to invest when it comes into seniors care and housing. Right now, we're seeing a hospital that is getting built in Dawson Creek. I think it's much needed, but we're going to need our healthcare providers, professionals, to be able to fill those positions. And we're already seeing local governments pursue the roles with Northern Health and creating the courses to be able to train and have it so then the people that come out of that actually want to be able to stay in our communities. And I think it's vital that when we see our healthcare up in Fort Nelson and Fort St. John and Dawson Creek and even Chetwynd, that we need to look at trying to get an external audit done with Northern Health and look at the red tape there that we can get rid of and try and get it so then it functions in a more sustainable manner. Or maybe even look at the regional health authorities that we used to have and the benefits of having accountability with locals to be able to sit on those boards, to be able to suggest the solutions to the problems that we're facing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. Question?
Hello, my name is Caleb, and my question is more pointed towards Mr. Keeley, but I am interested to hear the input from Mr. Davies. So the British Columbian Conservative Party has made a commitment to ending the NDP's drug decriminalization policy, citing it as a failure, which is something that I can agree with. However, the Conservative Party's proposal to deal with the opioid crisis just seems to be the continuation of the status quo, which is just jailing drug addicts and keeping drugs illegal, which since the 60s have caused our jail and court system to see an ever-increasing backlog of cases. So my question is, will the BC Conservative Party and Mr. Davies as an independent propose a new solution to the opioid crisis, one that follows the model, more in line with the model that Portugal uses, which not only has decriminalization but also addresses the root causes of drug use, like affordable housing, and lack of mental health services and job security. The last two of these, mental health services and job security, being a particular problem here in the North. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. Jordan?
Thank you very much for the question, and we're seeing this issue all over the region and all over the province, especially when we have these hardcore drugs that are just being allowed freely for people to take, and it's something that in no way is fentanyl a drug that you can self-regulate on. That normally when it's in our hospital system, it's highly regulated. It's a percentage on a patch, and it's not easy to get, yet somehow this current government is allowing it to be on our streets and freely used. So it's touching on your question that our government or our party hasn't formed government in a long time, and we're going to approach it in a new way, and that's looking at people first and patients first. And we want to promote being able to treat the people that need the help. So when it comes to mental health resources and drug addictions, we want to be able to give them a path out, but we also want to try and get the drugs off the street in as controlled manner as possible. That way, when people go through treatment and they go through stresses that might trigger them, that say the stress, drugs, or alcohol, that they just don't turn to a smorgasbord of drugs, especially hardcore drugs that are right there on the streets. So we need to get rid of those drugs. We need to provide the proper treatment, and we need to look at getting those people back to having their lives. And it's that is what our government wants. We want to look out what is best for our quality of life. That we do not want to see the problems in the past that that we've seen filter out, spread out from the Lower Mainland, of what I used to see on Hastings when I was a little kid.
Thank you, Jordan. Dan?
Yeah, for sure. It is a huge issue. It's not a Vancouver issue. It's a Fort St. John issue. It's a Fort Nelson issue. It's an issue all over. We've seen, unfortunately, many failures by government to deal with this issue. I think one of the biggest issues is especially up here in the north, but across the province, there is no long-term recovery options, or very limited long-term recovery options. I've had a number of families come into our office talking about, when a person has that moment of clarity and they want to seek treatment, they go to the mental health and addictions office in Fort St. John, and they're told to come back, in 10 days or a week, and we'll get them on the Northern Health bus and get them off to detox. We know the reality that isn't going to work. So we need to make sure everything is in place, and the decriminalization has not worked. The Portugal model, I don't think it's a model that we can perfectly lay over top of British Columbia, but there are components, I think, of it, and part of that is consequences. Consequences, leading to treatment, leading to people getting better is certainly something I believe in. But we need to look at the bigger cause. What is causing this? And mental health, often trauma-based, is, I think, a huge issue that is driving people. And we need to be looking at how do we manage that, the prevention, getting people mentally well. What are those options? And, that is something that's absolutely limited. And right now, that for the most part in our communities, that's on the backs of police. Police are doing the mental health, checks on people and dealing with that. And that's not right. We need to be bolstering that in our healthcare. It's obviously going to cost money up front to do this, but it's going to save lives, and it's going to get people better in the long run.
Thank you. Just adding to that, this next question is for you, Dan, to start with. What changes would you implement to improve rural health care?
Well, wow. I mean, healthcare is a massive issue that we've been facing for a number of years. And I would say I'm going to talk about something that I'm really proud of, and that was, it started actually when I was on city council even. But bringing it across the line is the MLA, and that's the registered nursing program that's offered at Northern Lights. And Jordan touched on this, a moment ago. It's that ability to train people locally. They are more likely to stay locally. And I'm so proud that we've had our first cohort of nurses graduate this year. Most of them have stayed local. These are the programs that we need to make sure that we're moving on, working with our post-secondary institutions. What other things can we do? And I spoke with Northern Lights recently, and they're looking at, what can we do within the healthcare, whether it's lab technicians or what have you, that we can start offering these things locally. And I think that is a big piece. We also need to be looking at the compensation model for doctors. And again, governments of all stripes are really good at creating these cookie cutter approaches. What's good for Vancouver is good for Fort Nelson. We know that that's not the case. Rural BC, more remote parts of British Columbia, need to be treated different, especially when we're trying to attract and trying to retain these professionals, especially in healthcare. Opportunities, I think, around foreign trained doctors, foreign trained health professionals. How can we come up with a system that will expedite these people that, might be a physician in their country, wherever that is, and, they're working here in the service industry. Surely to goodness, there's an opportunity that they can be brought into our healthcare system in some way, shape, or form to help alleviate the backlogs, to help alleviate the lineups, the waits. I think there's a ton of things that we need to be doing. One thing I've been advocating now for 5 years is an independent audit of Northern Health. Not to play gotcha, but how do we do things differently?
Thank you, Dan. Jordan, I'll read the question again. What changes would you implement to improve rural healthcare?
So I think the first thing that the Conservative Party would look at is the differences of all the regions, that they all struggle with different things, like it was mentioned, and then we'd look at the external audits of the health authorities to figure out exactly how we can promote and deal with different issues. I think this is one thing that really hasn't been done, and it's been very difficult to try and approach and help, especially when it comes to local governments that have been trying to help as much as possible. The biggest thing that we need to do is help bring in supports for doctors, because right now, if we don't have the nurses to work with them and underneath of them to be able to help support them, it makes it very difficult for those doctors to be able to do their jobs, and it can sometimes create liability issues, and the doctors don't want to do that, but they really push to try and help our communities. So that's the main thing that we really have to do in a lot of communities is focus on the training and creation of new nurses, new technicians, looking at allied healthcare that we see Northern Lights College trying to promote. It helps that you train local, they stay local. Promote the retention of the people to stay local as well, and show that appreciation. And especially after COVID, that we've seen our healthcare workers face a lot of pressure on the front lines, and we need to alleviate that to keep them. And we really need to bring in a lot of fresh blood and help them, because this has been a 20-year problem that hasn't been dealt with properly. So those would be the things that our party would be looking at first and foremost.
Thank you. Mayor Fraser.
Thank you. My question is also about healthcare. So whether you'll let me ask it now, or I'm ready to wait until you've got your written questions finished, as long as I can come back to healthcare.
I'm getting a ton of written questions, so you might just as well go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So, gentlemen, you're speaking music to my ears with respect to healthcare reform. In 2002, when Kevin Falcone was the Minister of Deregulation, he sold BC Rail, and he centralized the governance of healthcare in our province. We had 56 local healthcare groups around the province who looked after the different hospital districts and the operations of the healthcare. That was decentralized down to 5, and there's not a mayor I speak to in the north that doesn't agree that the governance of healthcare is an issue, particularly in Northern Health, with respect to the way it responds or doesn't respond to the local needs. So what I'm hearing from you is that you're prepared to work on that. The question I have, and it may strike the difference between an MLA who's in a party and an MLA who's an independent. For Jordan, what is your relationship with Rustad, and how are you going to take our particular concerns to him within your party to make sure that we're being heard with respect to the governance of healthcare and the ideas that you've put forward? For Dan, if you're elected as an independent, how will you be able to forward these ideas to whatever government is in power if you're elected? So you can see I like what you're saying. I just want to know how either of you are going to be able to take those messages forward, because you're in two different scenarios if you're elected.
Jordan, I'll get you to answer that question first.
Yeah, I think when it comes to, I was one of the first 10 candidates when it came to joining the Conservative Party of BC. I work closely with John Rustad. Like I said, it'll be amazing that when we get in and we can form a majority government, the differences that we can make, and how fast we can actually expedite some of these changes, especially when we can have the Minister of Health within our own party, and the lines of communication that can be established in comparison to if you're an independent, then most likely you'll never be a cabinet minister. Most likely you'll never chair a major committee. I think there are major benefits to being in a party. And I think that what we need in the biggest way is to actually make a lot of these changes happen as quick as possible, and look at it from a practical, common sense perspective. I really think that it's looking very well, considering that when we first started, we went from 0 to 93 candidates, and we've had some growing pains. And I truly believe that when BC United collapsed, or they're just in a neutral status right now, that we picked the best members or the best candidates to be able to fill those positions for all of the regions across the province. So I think that from John Rustad's perspective, that being able to understand the rural areas as well as the city, I think he'll be able to bridge a lot of divides and communicate in a very beneficial manner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And, a great question. Obviously, you and I have spoke a number of times, and, I'm certainly a believer of, more localized control, hospital boards, which I think is something that we need to be looking at. Just how the health authorities have grown over the years to these giant kingdoms that they've become. When I look at Alberta, similar size, they've got 16 vice presidents. British Columbia has almost 70 vice presidents. So, we talk about the red tape and that bureaucracy. So I think we need to have a fundamental change on healthcare and how it's delivered. I think, looking at the parties, I think both parties are very aware that massive change needs to happen. And I look at it as an independent, contrary to having no power, there are incredible opportunities, especially with the parliament right now looking like it's going to be, a statistical tie. The potential of 4 or more independents being elected, holding that balance of power, which gives incredible bargaining power to the independents and what that looks like moving forward. We saw that in 2017, and I truly believe that we are going to be looking at a very similar situation right now. I think the other piece is too, and we saw what Dick Neufeld did up here, and he sat as an independent for quite some time. Him and Jack Weisgerber. He did some big stuff as an independent, and as an independent, you have the ability to negotiate with whoever's in the legislature. And I think that's where my experienced leadership that I've had over the last 7 years as the MLA and 13 years building relationships as a councillor will be very strong in the BC legislature.
Thank you. What is your vision for the education system and reforms in BC? Dan?
Well, as first of all, a former school teacher myself, and the former shadow minister of education in the province, and more importantly, 2 school-age children. Education is extremely important to me. I've always believed that the foundation, the foundation of any successful society is in a good education system. British Columbia used to have, and it's not quite there anymore, one of the best education systems in the world. People from other countries would come to British Columbia and see how things were being delivered, seeing how things were being done here in BC, and taking them back. We strayed away from that a little bit. I really think that we need to get back to focusing on the big basics and producing students that are able to face the challenges in our world. Looking at getting back to math, reading, writing, science, technology, but more importantly, socializing our children properly. And I've always believed that we need to be Having parent involvement in our education system. We used to always have that. Age appropriateness. Let's be honest, there's been some things, even here in Fort Nelson, there's been some inappropriate things that have shown their head in our schools. Things need to be age appropriate. And finally, we need to be supporting our school teachers, not chastising them, which we often hear, in media, we hear at meetings and such. We need more teachers. We need people to come into that profession and support our growing children. But we also need school districts. We need to be working with our school districts, encouraging the public to attend trustee meetings and getting engaged in PAC meetings. And that's kind of where that parent involvement comes in. And I think if we can pull all those pieces together, British Columbia will be back on top in the school systems of the world.
Thank you, Dan. Jordan, what is your vision for the education system and reforms in BC?
I believe that we need to go back to basics, that we need to give children the foundation of how to pursue all these different options that are out there. That there's so many different things that children and even high school grads, that there are just so many options and they get confused. And I think one of the first things that our party has talked about getting rid of is SOGI, that it came in as an anti-bullying aid for teachers, and what it's done is not actually stop bullying. And when it comes to a topic like bullying, we need to protect all of the kids, not just a certain group. I think that's one thing that's where certain ideologies do not belong in schools, that schools should be neutral and they should focus on the basics, so then they can teach the kids to be able to grow and go forward, because all kids are different, and we need to see those differences. We have to have parental input and respect. Otherwise, we'll see differences where we start to see the homeschooling increase. Or a great example of in Baldonnel, outside of Fort St. John, is a school where they're called Freedom Thinkers, and it's a school to promote entrepreneurial thought. And it's something where kids are taught all the basics and how to do the trades and how to think about running a business. And it just got an award, or got ranked for being the highest out of our region over all the public schools. So maybe that's a thought of a direction that we need to start going again. And we need to put the children first, and that we need to teach them how to learn and not what to learn, because every child is different and they're our future.
Thank you. Jordan, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Cliff Ashdown. I think one of the drawbacks to our community has certainly been in the last 10 or 15 years is the fact that Canfor controls all the lumber supply in this area. And consequently, them doing that, they've sat on it and really did nothing with it, closing down the stuff that they had here. And back in the 80s, there used to be at that point, you either used the timber supply area that you were granted over a period of time, or you lost it. And now they seem to be able to sit on it. They changed that rule some 10 or 12 years ago. They can sit on it forever and a day. And we have people up here that would like to do something with some of that supply. And there's nothing being done with it because they got it all tied up. Would you guys be looking at some legislation to change, I don't know what rules, I'm not saying you go back to where we were, but certainly back to something that if you don't use it, you lose it. You shouldn't be able to sit on it forever and a day. So that would be my question to you.
Jordan, I'd get you to answer that first, please.
Sure. Coming from a farming background, I try and farm sustainably, and you look at it from an environmental standpoint, and I think we need to go back to forestry when it comes to handling it in a beneficial manner, but then also being able to approach in a way that we're doing it sustainably as well. And those products that we're harvesting, depending on where they're from and the tenures that they have, we should focus on trying to promote harvesting those locally. That's one of the reasons why so many of our communities grew across the province, was because of forestry, and that they could use those products in different ways. And a lot of the industries are just primarily looking at the primary resource. And we need to focus on secondary resources to where we can actually expand our industries and create more jobs, and not just look at shipping raw logs. And I don't think that tenure should just be able to sit there and not being used, because right now we're seeing a great example with the fires that we're having, and that they're just spreading and going further and further. We need to farm our forests properly and in a manner where we can actually do cut blocks and fire guards that make it so that it doesn't travel in the way that it is, and make it so then the province doesn't have to spend $2 billion fighting it every year. I think that a lot of our communities are struggling right now when it comes to the forestry sector, and it's very important, especially looking at the background that John Rustad has, to be able to go back and harvest in a beneficial manner to where we can actually try and get some of this infrastructure going back again and get these companies back where they actually can provide those solid jobs. Thanks.
Thank you, Jordan. Dan?
Yeah, I completely agree. Use it or lose it. You know, and over the years coming up here, you know, talking to different people that have, you know, worked in the OSB or, you know, worked at Takama. I mean, you know, these are the stories that we've been hearing. One of the things that I think we need to be looked at, and it's been mentioned a few times over the past few years, is the appurtency and looking at, you know, communities owning the wood. You know, the wood that is logged in the region needs to be produced here. The value add has to happen in our communities. And I really believe that we need to get back to that. I think since we saw that coming, unfortunately, John Rustad, you know, was around the table shortly after this came in and saw the demise of so many of our communities, such as Fort Nelson. And we've seen it over and over again, where you've got the Canfors getting these super mills, and you know, the logs are being shipped from miles around down to, you know, in Fort St. John's case, Fort Nelson's case, down to Fort St. John, or even off onto Prince George. That's not right. That resource belongs to each and every one of you that are sitting in this room, that live in this community, and that's a resource that I'm going to continue to fight for, to make sure that those logs are not shipped out of here, but they're actually produced, and value add goes back to the benefit of this community.
Thank you. Next question for you, Dan. If elected, what specific actions will you do to improve, expand public road transportation between communities on the Alaska Highway all the way to the Yukon border?
Well, I mean, I've driven the highway numerous times, and, you know, certainly the section of road between here and Fort St. John, we do need to continue. I mean, you know, one thing that I've heard over and over again is you know, the number of passing lanes that we need, you know, the rough roads that are just constantly facing the same issues. It always seems to be every few years you get the same slides, the same areas that are all beat up. You know, we need to be focusing on fixing those. You know, it goes back to the whole, the requirement for rail, and I know it's not talking about the highway necessarily, but as a transportation corridor, and I truly believe we're you know, a short few years away from seeing, you know, natural gas activity here again. We can't have those sand trucks going up and down the highway. You know, it's going to get beat up. We need to be seeing that rail line improve so that sand can be taken off the highways and, you know, put onto those railways. So we need to be looking at not just our highways, but looking at rail and how we get that going so that our highways, you know, aren't beat up right now by industry, which we are seeing so much of right now. And obviously we see a lot of money going into big bridge infrastructure, you know, in the south. Again, this region sends a lot of revenue to Victoria. We need to be seeing some of that revenue come back to this region, and that's making sure that our infrastructure is kept up.
Thank you. Jordan, if elected, what specific actions will you do to improve, expand public road transportation between communities on the Alaska Highway all the way to the Yukon border?
I think the first thing that, working with the party, that we've heard John say before, that we'd be looking at making major investments in infrastructure, including replacing the Taylor Bridge. Some of the other things that we need to focus on are safety items, that especially when it comes to our contractors that are taking care of our roads, being able to actually make sure they're in good condition and that the lines are actually visible, that they're properly sanded. These contractors have found that their budgets are a lot tighter, and we need to ultimately look at safety overall for people being able to travel these roads. It's a major corridor that we look at. There's a lot of tourism that goes through. So we have to look at our public transportation in the ways that how we can actually put money into the system and improve the infrastructure that it's being neglected for far too long. And especially even when you look at not just here, but in the Lower Mainland and other areas, that we'll have to look at major projects to be able to actually get people out working. And I think that overall, it has been neglected. And when you see some of the road systems, it's great coming in here. Then you see brand new blacktop that have carried through some of the stretches. But I think that there are other areas where they're really being neglected, and those have to get improved. And I think it's one of those things where you may see industry beat up the roads, but then those companies also pay a lot of money in taxes, and we want to see that money come back to the rural areas and make it so then public safety is number one.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions here, so I'm going to limit your answers to 1:30. Christy?
Hi, you hear me?
You bet.
All right. Just quickly about all the resources and all this great stuff. I'd like to hear about what you guys have to say about LNG and Site C, and if we should be considering or thinking about that, or if we should wait a little bit. I heard you say industry, maybe 2 years for us to have something going on here in oil and gas. What do you see for our future, and what should we look at?
Jordan, I'll get you to start that.
Okay. I believe that Site C, when you look at the power consumption of last year and what we had to import into our province, that everything that Site C can offer, once it's fully running, we're already using. We need to look at alternative options to where we can actually generate power in a major way. And it's one of the great things about LNG is that we can use that product. We can generate power with that product, and that's one of the things that we've got here, that we can generate in Fort Nelson. We can generate enough power to supply more to Alberta and bring in fresh revenue streams. And I think that when you look at our climate footprint, one of the best ways in Canada, we're already doing an amazing job when it comes to the environment and how we've improved a lot of different issues. But the best way that we can make a difference globally is by looking at the countries that are major polluters. And by exporting that LNG, we're actually enabling them to be able to improve their scenarios, so then they're not polluting as much. So I think that by looking at different options, and one of the options that we were looking at are trying to possibly lift the moratorium on nuclear. Whether or not that's a viable option, I think we have to be able to look at it. I don't know if it actually is the main option, or you can look at other sources. Thank you.
Dan?
Yeah, for sure. And I've always been a big proponent of natural gas and liquefied natural gas. One of the founding members of the Fort St. John for LNG, and helped you, I think, kick off the FN for LNG way back when. Had some great times, trying to bring the province to a place where we were proud of this industry, knowing that this industry was going to bring good paying family jobs right across British Columbia, bringing revenue into the province so that we can support healthcare. Unfortunately, we saw a lot of that derailed. I am very happy to say that, we've got the big one across the line now, LNG Canada. But your question, I think, very specifically about Fort Nelson, I think there is a great future here in Fort Nelson. I really do, and it's coming soon, I believe. We have LNG Canada. The expansion is now getting ready to expand already, and it's just opened. Wood fiber is moving towards getting underway. The Heisla's Cedar LNG has been approved. The Kitsalem LNG, just north of Prince Rupert, has been approved. These are big projects that are going to be going here in the coming couple of years. They will need natural gas. And I believe it's more natural gas than what is going to be able to be provided in the Montney. This gas, the challenge with the gas up here is that it's not liquid rich, and that's been a challenge. But there's a bright future. They are going to need the natural gas in Fort Nelson.
Thank you, Dan. Go ahead.
Hi, I have a question for Mr. Keeley. You said previously you want to get rid of the carbon tax. I just want to ask, how can you make sure that reduction in price gets to consumers and not just companies who can make I forget what the price is now, but I'm sorry. Just how can you prevent, this could go to Mr. Davis too, but just how can you prevent companies from increasing profits while still keeping us from having affordable gas and...
I'll ask Mr. Davies to answer that
sure,
first, just to get the order straight. Mr. Davies.
All right. The carbon tax, I'm absolutely in favor of getting rid of the carbon tax. We have seen, the impact that it's had on the cost of doing business on everything. The challenge is the federal carbon tax is mandated across the country. And you cannot undo that. We've seen other provinces try and take a stand. And unfortunately, the federal government, has some bigger hammers that they can use to make it happen. We're not going to get rid of that until we probably see a conservative government federally. At which case, then I think, obviously, we've even seen the premier, our present premier, change his colors on that lately. But for a government in British Columbia to say we're going to get rid of the carbon tax tomorrow, does nothing more than now, instead of leaving that money in control of the province where we can immediately cut it on home heating, which I think we absolutely need to do, and those other pieces, it's going to be now just sent to Ottawa, and where we have no control about it. So we absolutely need to be cutting the carbon tax. I have no issues with that. And you will see, and that's going to be a role of government to make sure that, industry, the retail sectors, the trucking industry absolutely needs to reflect that, because it is a direct impact on inflation that you pay for all your goods.
Mr. Keeley.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. BC brought the carbon tax in first before the federal government did. Currently, we have to remove it ourselves first before the federal government can. Our plan is that when we get in, that we will remove the carbon tax. We will advocate with the federal government to negotiate what will work best for our province. Because right now, it's when you look in the north, we're getting persecuted with this tax of how much our bills cost. And right now, we're willing to fight to try and keep that cost down. So we've seen Scott Moe pursue this role and challenge the federal government in different ways. I think British Columbia can do the same, and I think it's worthwhile to try and do that to make it so that we're not paying as many taxes and that our lives are more affordable. And heaven forbid, or heaven, I really hope that when we look at the federal election, that we'll see those Conservatives get in, and they'll end up removing it across Canada. And right now, the polling is definitely showing that possibility. Especially right now, provincially, for quite a while, we haven't been getting any rebates, and a lot of the other provinces have when they're part of the federal system. That we need to look to try and get what is best for people in our province first and foremost.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hey there. Dan and I have had numerous conversations regarding the BC Liberals / the BC United not being able to push through motions or legislation because they were in a minority government situation. My question to both candidates would be, seeing as Dan, if you were elected as the single independent, that you would be in a minority situation. And Jordan, if your government was to, heaven forbid, as you said, get a minority position or, opposition position, how would you, Dan, as a single MLA, provide Fort Nelson with the voice that we need in the BC legislature, pushing through bills that, while you were a member of BC United or BC Liberals in an official opposition position, could not push through? And Jordan, how would you work with the NDP government if they form a government in a minority, or an opposition position, to push through and recognize the voice of the North?
Mr. Keithley, I'll get you to answer that first, please.
Thank you. Heaven forbid. When it comes to that scenario, I think that the only way that that would really happen right now is when you look at the amount of independents that are across the province. So say there are some that can split the vote. It could make it so then we don't form a majority government. Currently, the polls are fairly consistent, showing that we will form a majority government. But if it is a minority, I have a track record to advocate what is best for my constituents, and I will pursue that, and I will advocate with whatever power does form government. I think right now it's very clear that this year is very important, that we see a change going forward, and right now I'm optimistic that we will see that change happen, and if it doesn't, then I'll pursue that route when we get there. And I think we have an amazing party to be able to pursue different options, and that's the whole point of having a party, is that you do have more influence. So I think that's where we'd start.
Thank you. Mr. Davies.
Yeah, and there's a lot of speculation. We would need a crystal ball to kind of speculate what's going to happen. Again, as a statistical tie, I mean, there's a lot of options. Even the best pundits, that have been in the news industry for many years, can't figure out what things are going to look like. As an MLA, and I think this is important. The privileges that are bestowed upon an MLA in the legislature, it doesn't matter what party you're attached to, it's to the MLA. So the ability to debate all bills, the ability to amend bills. And I think that's really important. And previously, we did influence a lot of legislation that came in. We amended some of it got amended, not all. We got the government to actually change direction on a number of the bills. The Land Amendment Act was one such bill just recently. The opposition role, and there's anybody who's not government is opposition. You have your official opposition, then you have your opposition members. The ability to draw the attention to government's decisions, drawing media's attention to them, and starting to influence the public to have that public opinion is very strong when you can move public opinion one way, and then that applies pressure to the government. There's lots of opportunities and lots of ways that opposition members can influence and introduce legislation, regardless of party affiliation or not.
Thank you. Policing across the province has been a big topic for a long time. What are your thoughts on the existing policing and sentencing in the systems which we have provincially and federally? Mr. Davies.
Well, the provincial policing model, I think, is broken. You know, I know the mayor and yourself as the former mayor, you know, the funding model doesn't work well in British Columbia. You know, we heard today the mayor talking about, you know, the crime issues that are happening. There's no direct control. The municipality has no direct control over the policing in British Columbia. I think we need to change that. We need to have some mechanism where local governments can, you know, direct and at least point in the right direction where policing needs to happen. We need to, you know, we need more police. We need more feet on the ground, especially right now in Fort Nelson. The second part of the question, the justice system, you know, and I've been saying this for years, the David Eby catch and release, and we keep seeing the catch and release. There's no accountability anymore. And that is a huge issue. Regardless of what happens, people need to be held accountable. And, you know, what we're seeing is we're giving people rope and they're taking it. You know, and they're you know, some cases, and not just Vancouver, even up here, arrested in the morning, they're out in the afternoon, they're committing crime that evening. Repeat, and it keeps getting worse and worse. We need to have a justice system that actually enforces the law, holds criminals accountable, and keeps you safe. It is absolutely unacceptable that you're not feeling safe in your communities. So we need to be looking at the justice system that does justice again, and a police service that actually serves its people.
Thank you. Jordan, policing across the province has been a big topic for a long time. What are your thoughts on the existing policing and sentencing in the systems which we have provincially and federally?
I think we need to go back to where we're actually putting them in jail for when they commit crimes. That right now we see a system where we're actually promoting crime to happen by allowing hardcore drugs to come onto our streets, by allowing criminals to traffic them in a bigger way to a larger market. We need to restrict this more in a bigger way, and the Conservative Party of BC is going to get rid of those hardcore drugs. We also need to stop this revolving door of crime, and especially when you see that the current government is not really doing what's best for the rural communities. And when those communities decline, we see certain other things take over, that people will choose to turn to drinking, to drugs, or homelessness. It's not a good thing for our rural communities. So we need to support people overall in a better way to have a better quality of life. We need to work on the revolving door of criminals just getting out and seeing 80 criminals committing 10,000 crimes. We need to stop this from happening. We need to look at appointing different judges, and then also be able to bring in changes to our court systems, so then people are actually getting tried.
Thank you. Investment in early childhood education for investment in early education for childhood results in life, long benefits. What is your vision for continuing to expand access, quality for early childhood education? Jordan.
So the Conservative Party of BC is very supportive of the education of our children going forward. We want to look at branching out at the training and being able to let kids know in middle school that there's different options, or even when they're younger age, that the prerequisites that they might have to do going forward, they're provided with different options to be able to get the careers that they need, and the ones that we need across Canada, because we need a lot of skilled professionals and trades across Canada. And we need to look at doing it in a better manner, where we can help people get through the system in a way where they're not confused and struggling. That we need to get kids out from living in their parents' basements as adults, that we need to be able to give them a job and provide resources in a community where they can thrive and be able to buy a house of their own. So when it comes to early education, there's a lot of different avenues that we can pursue when it comes to creation of teaching positions and resources, and looking at different schools that can be formed. And I personally think that when it comes to SFU branching out and opening up their position to be able to train doctors, I think that's amazing. We have to be able to look at funding scenarios like that.
Thank you. Dan, investment in early education for childhood results in lifelong benefits. What is your vision for continuing to expand access quality for early childhood education?
Yeah, I'm a huge supporter of our, and Northern Lights College has a great ECE program. On the childcare aspect, I think that is an economic policy. Making sure that there are daycare spaces available, making sure that people are qualified to work in those daycares. At one time they did have an ECE. I guess you can still do it on a correspondence, I believe, here in Fort Nelson, the early childhood education program. But it is foundational, I think, to make sure that we have the right people, looking after and providing daycare to folks in Fort Nelson and throughout northern BC. One of the big challenges that that we've heard in my office is the lack of daycare spaces, especially for healthcare workers when we're trying to attract and retain, whether we're talking nurses or doctors, the lack of availability for those childcare spaces. We need to be making sure that we are paying properly. I know that that's one of the big complaints that we hear is ECE childcare providers are paid very low. We need to make sure that it is a good wage. These are the people that are looking after our kids, for goodness sake. So I'm absolutely a big supporter of our ECE programs, the early childhood education programs, making sure that we do have good daycares across our communities in the north, which is huge, in huge shortage right now, even here in Fort Nelson.
Thank you. David Eby has announced the NDP, if re-elected, will revamp travel subsidies for rural and remote residents that have to travel for health care. Would each of you support increased access to travel subsidies for those needing to travel for health care? Dan?
Well, I mean, the travel subsidies are a joke, anyways. We absolutely, it's a travesty what happens when, you're here in Fort Nelson, you have to travel to Prince George, or you have to travel to Vancouver to seek medical help. The expense that you pay, the subsidies, the tax breaks, is minuscule to the amount that you're out of pocket to seek health care. We understand here in Fort Nelson, or even Fort St. John, we're not going to have surgeons, specialists and all that stuff. So we need to travel. But it's equal access. If you were to tell someone in Vancouver that they had to go to Kelowna or up to Quesnel to have their surgery and they're going to be out of pocket, you would have riots. But we do it. And it's absolutely shocking that there aren't more supports to help people to seek the medical care that they require. Again, we live up here because we're providing so much to the economy here in British Columbia. We're up here because we love it up here. We should have equal access, like everybody else does in the big cities, to the healthcare services that we need, to the specialists that we need. And it shouldn't come, with you having to remortgage your house to get the medical care that you need. So absolutely, I do support increasing those subsidies.
Thank you. Mr. Keeley, David Eby has announced the NDP, if re-elected, will revamp travel subsidies for rural and remote residents that have to travel for health care. Would you support increased access to travel subsidies for those needing to travel for health care?
Thank you. John Rustad and the Conservative Party of BC wants to put patients first. We want to make it so then we don't have to travel long distances to be able to get the care that we need. The fact that if you're in Fort Nelson and you have to go to Fort St. John to be able to have a baby, and there's no housing, instead you're looking at a hotel room and you end up having to pay $8,000 just to be able to have your baby in another city. This is something that we do not want to see this happen, and that's why we want to look at reforming our healthcare system to be able to figure out what's best needed for our rural communities. And John Rustad's interested in that. He's from rural BC. He understands what it's like to be able to live in these regions. We want to focus on having shorter wait lists. We want to focus on if we do have to use the private system to try and subsidize the strains that are on our public system, we will do that. One way or another, if there's 40 people that need to get an MRI and half of them would be waiting a year to be able to get that, we have to pay for those 40 people no matter what. We may as well shift them to a private clinic in Dawson, and we cut that wait list in half. These are the things that we can look at. We need to do an external audit of our health authorities and figure out the best way going forward, and we're willing to pursue that as much as possible.
Okay, I'm informed that we have about enough time for 3 more questions. So I have a couple of questions here that are specific to each candidate. The first one, Jordan, if elected, will you commit to having a staffed constituency office in Fort Nelson? 1 minute.
Yes, I think it's very important to have an office up here. I think that was a great idea to do that. We live in a very unique area. It's a very vast region with different diversities and different cultures that we have to approach it in a different way. And I think having that office is very worthwhile.
Thank you. Dan, what is something impactful you've done or impacted change over in your time to support the region?
Well, I think probably the biggest thing that, 65-70% of my job, our job in the constituency office, is supporting constituents directly as they navigate through healthcare, as they navigate through children and families, WorkSafe. At any given time, we've got, and I'll speak very specifically to the Fort Nelson office, 50 or 60 people, contacting the office. We've got, a half a dozen to a dozen case files that are constantly open. That is my job, is to support the individuals, to support the constituents, to get people the help that they need as they often hit a wall in dealing with the provincial government, which is, you can imagine, quite the burden. Someone who just needs a little bit of help, and everywhere they turn, it's a no. So they come to our office, and Kim and myself, we work through a plan and get them the help that they need. That is the biggest thing that I do, and it's helping the individual constituents here in Fort Nelson.
Thank you. Sir.
Yeah, I'm Pablo. I guess my question is, where are you guys going to get the money to make all these reforms, to reform the health system, to build jails, to fix roads? Where the money is going to come? When Canada is following the SWIFT system, following neoliberal policies that are pushing us the value of the Canadian dollar down the tube. We're following the Americans, and the petrodollar is crumbling. And just this week, we lost a lot of money. All my savings are gone. So where are you going to get the money to fix all this?
Okay.
Why don't we invite the Chinese to put an electrical car factory here in Fort Nelson? Or we don't invite the Russians to build the railroad track that we need, the same way that they build it in Africa? Why are we not following the BRICS system?
Okay, thank you. Let's give Mr. Davies a chance to reply.
Yeah, well, I think really quickly is, and I alluded to it a little bit earlier, if we have a robust economy and we're supporting our resource sector, the revenues will come. We've seen that in the past. And, if, again, the forestry is ticking along. We have natural gas industries ticking along. Those are revenues that are going into the provincial government, revenues that they won't have to reach into your pocket for. You know, I also mentioned the 140 new public sector employees that have been hired by the provincial government. You know, we need to be cutting red tape and getting out of the way. We need to be looking at how can we lower taxes? How can we increase the revenues? There's lots of opportunities. We've unfortunately seen a government the last 7 years that is spending money like drunken sailors. And that's kind of where we've got to where we're at today. We need to embrace our resource sector, promote it, welcome back people into British Columbia as a good place to do business, and we're going to start seeing those revenues come in, and that's going to offset what they basically have to reach into your pocket for.
Mr. Keeley.
I think Canada and British Columbia are an amazing place, that we have almost everything that we need to be able to sustain us. That we need to go back to supporting our own infrastructure. Because when you look at the focus of going globalized, we've actually sacrificed a lot of our own structures, our own infrastructure. And by putting those systems back in place, being able to utilize our resources, and when it comes to forestry, that we can make it so then the forestry it's harvested and utilized within the regions that the tenures are. And by doing that, you're supporting the infrastructure of those regions. When you bolster the economy that way, it just accelerates being able to pay off a lot of things. And when it comes to conservatives, that's what we're great at, is thinking about things in a practical way and fiscally. That I can't operate my farm that way. I've had to think about different ways to respond and adapt. And I think sometimes we just get too far out of our depth focusing on the world economy when we need to look at what we have within our own. And maybe that lumber, we should be using it in our focus on using it for our own housing instead of shipping it. There are a lot of different revenue streams that you spend the money local, that it does a lot more locally to your infrastructure.
Thank you. Mr. Keeley, does your government have a plan to balance the budget, and if so, how and when?
Our government has a plan to balance the budget. Unfortunately, when you look at the spending that has happened previously, our debt is at a record high. We need to get our revenue streams doing better again. We need to look at the red tape that we're seeing in major ways with the government under the NDP control being 38% bigger. We need to focus on how to streamline different processes. This is what conservatives are good at doing. They're good at looking at things in a practical way and trying to streamline them and cut out the red tape.
Thank you. Dan, if you were holding the balance of power, what would you do to plan to balance the budget, and if so, how and when?
Well, absolutely, and you know, this has been one of the things that we've been facing for a number of years now is deficit budgets. We can't continue on. We're at over $100 billion in debt in this province, doubled since 2017, since the NDP took over. You know, one of the biggest things that I would be doing is, you know, as an independent, is holding whoever's in government to account, to making sure that they're balancing the budgets. We need to get back, you know, back to where we can be looking at how do we invest in our children's future. Because right now, all we're doing is robbing our kids' future. Because that's who's going to be paying for these huge deficits that we're running. Again, almost $9 billion this year. You know, averaging $5 billion deficits for the last 4 years. We cannot continue to do this. And by, again, looking at, you know, promoting the resource sector, looking at cutting red tape, looking at, you know, the different ways that, you know, unfortunately the NDP has been spending, you know, we need to make sure that those are undone.
Okay, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get through all the questions tonight, so I'm going to pick one final one. If elected, what is your party's priority with respect to addressing the labor challenges we face today? Mr. Davies.
Yeah, the labor challenges that, that we face today is huge. It's here in Fort Nelson, it's across the north. We need to be providing opportunities to get people trained up. We have a college here, I think, that is underutilized in Fort Nelson. How can we integrate different courses that we can get people trained up? Looking at trade opportunities, the trades, getting people involved in the trades. I know there's great relationships between the school districts and the college, getting people into trades. And we also need to be, not looking at what we've seen as a cookie cutter with the temporary foreign workers. I think temporary foreign workers, when they're here contributing, plays an important role in our communities. And we've seen this across many of our northern communities where they do fill a very important role. But between that and making sure that we're training people up and getting them into the roles and the positions that they need, those are priorities.
Thank you. Mr. Keeley, if elected, what is your party's priority with respect to addressing the labor challenges we face today?
Thank you. So our party is going to focus on the fact that across Canada, we're short about 1 million trades workers. We need to focus on the fact that the baby boomers getting out of the workforce has created a void in a major way. When you look at the void of the trades workers, no matter how much you throw at the housing crisis, we don't have the tradespeople to build them. So we need to look at our trades, and we need to emphasize and encourage people to not be scared to get their hands dirty and be a millwright like myself or a farmer. We need to promote going out and being able to actually, if you do a skilled job, that it has rewards and that we're not taxed to death and that life can actually be affordable to where you actually can go out and buy your own home. We need to promote the fact that a lot of the healthcare workers were baby boomers retired as well. This has been 20 years in the making, that we need to look at the creation of these workers and look at our immigration as well and trying to bring in the skilled workers that we need.
Thank you very much. This will conclude our evening session. We will now ask each of the candidates, they'll have 3 minutes in the reverse order from the opening statement. So I'll call on Dan Davies to come to the microphone for his closing statements.
Thanks very much, Gary. And we've talked about a lot of important issues that I've been fighting for the residents of Fort Nelson, issues that I hope to continue to be fighting for. One of the things that I was going to mention in my opening remarks, and it's come up a couple times tonight, is what can independents do? And we've touched on it a little bit. And the standing orders within the legislature have changed to allow independent candidates, independent MLAs, to represent their ridings in ways that they've never been able to before. Again, debating all bills, introducing private members' bills, amending bills, debating the budget, and I think a big thing is the one time during the day is holding government to account is during question period. Whereas as a sitting MLA in a party, you get 2 questions in a year, 1 per session roughly. As an independent, 14 per year. They have changed the standing orders, modernized the legislation so that independent candidates can do more in representing their ridings. And I think that is really important. The best part about being an independent is never being whipped. And I think, unfortunately, Jordan is naive if he thinks being in a party, he is not going to be whipped. Because that is exactly how the system works around the world, and it's not going to change here in British Columbia. I have the ability to do direct democracy, directly representing your concerns for Fort Nelson and the Peace region in the legislature. You heard tonight a lot of things very similar between Jordan and I. And I think what this is, at the end of the day, this election is about sending the right Conservative candidate to Victoria, and I'm looking forward to having your support to send my leadership and my experience to Victoria to continue to represent you. And before I go, I want to thank the Chamber as well as Gary for hosting us tonight. And thank you all for coming out.
Thank you, Dan. I'll now call on Jordan Keeley.
Well, thank you very much for having me. That was quite the first forum that I've ever done before. Getting hammered with questions for an hour and a half, it's definitely interesting. You know, I loved it. I've been in politics for 2 years now. I have never thought that I'd get into politics. I believe that when you get into something, when your heart's in the right place and you've got drive and determination, that's what makes it, so then you'll do whatever you have to get the job done. And I don't believe that you have to have experience to be good at what you're doing. You need to try and approach it and have the drive to do your best and to adapt. The fact that I got into local government and I sat in a boardroom where there's 11 other directors and 8 of them are municipal and 4 are rural, and you have to work with each other and make that dynamic work. It can be challenging, but I think I've done a great job representing my constituents. And now that I'm getting into provincial politics, it's one of the things with parties is that I expressed that same thing to John. I said, I'm going to do what's best for my region. I'm not going to be whipped. If you try and do that, I'll look at other avenues. And it's amazing that the reason that John is in the position that he's in is the fact that he got whipped and kicked out of BC United. And it's something that he knows that very personally. And he doesn't like the fact that it happened because he was standing up for his constituents. And he said to all of his candidates that when we get in, we'll swear an oath, the fact that we'll represent our communities and our regions first and foremost before the party. And I believe it when he says that. And it's amazing that being a part of a party, the way that we've grown and the things we've faced so far, that when we get in and actually form a majority government, I truly believe that the rate that our party is being accelerating and the way that we're ramping everything up, that can happen. And there's a good chance that it would be amazing if I could put my name in to actually try and be a forestry minister or try and go for agriculture. Right now, you look at the experience that minister has. Pam Alexis has an arts degree, and she's the agriculture minister. I would love it if I could pursue that as a farmer, to be able to make life better and more sustainable for farmers across our province. I don't think I have to have experience as an existing politician provincially to be able to make that happen. I believe that I have the strive and the heart to make it happen. I look at the goals that my party has when it comes to affordability, inflation, healthcare, crimes and drugs, and improving our resource sector, that we can make that happen. And we can pursue that avenue as a party, and we can make it happen in a manner as fast as possible, because we need a better way of life. Thank you very much for having me.
So that concludes our evening. If you have more questions for the candidates, they'll be available in the lobby. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get through all the questions tonight. That concludes our evening. Thank you very much. Thank you.